Have you ever stopped to wonder what turns a kind-hearted, ethical person into someone capable of cruelty, or even outright evil? Imagine someone you deeply respect, a person you trust, slowly changing, their once familiar face becoming unrecognizable. It sounds like a rare, disturbing phenomenon, right? But what if I told you that this transformation isn't just an isolated occurrence? Instead, it's a pattern, a deeply ingrained aspect of human behavior that has repeated itself throughout history. Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling and thought-provoking questions about human nature. Why do good people sometimes commit terrible acts? By the end of this discussion, you'll uncover the unsettling psychological and social forces that can push ordinary individuals toward darkness. But more importantly, you'll learn how to recognize and resist these influences, because understanding them could change the way you see yourself in the world forever. This isn't just about history books or distant events. It's about us. It's a mirror reflecting something we might not want to see, our own vulnerability to these forces. The truth is, the line between good and evil is razor thin, and under the right circumstances, even the most moral individuals can cross it. One of the most unsettling explanations for this phenomenon comes from Philip Zimbardo, a psychologist who conducted the infamous Stanford prison experiment. His research introduced a concept known as the Lucifer Effect, the idea that environment, roles, and authority can corrupt even the most virtuous people, turning them into perpetrators of harm. If this sounds extreme, just look at history. The guards in Nazi concentration camps, soldiers who carried out ethnic cleansing, and even everyday citizens who stood by while atrocities unfolded, they weren't born evil. Many were ordinary individuals, swept up in circumstances that activated the darkest parts of human nature. But why does this happen? The answer lies in a combination of psychological and social forces so powerful that they can override personal morality and reshape behavior in ways most people would never expect. One of the most alarming aspects of human behavior is obedience to authority. Psychologist Stanley Milgram demonstrated this in his famous obedience experiments in the 1960s. In his study, participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person, who was actually an actor pretending to be in pain. Shockingly, most participants continued inflicting pain, even when they believed they were causing serious harm, simply because an authority figure told them to. Now, pause for a moment and think about your own life. How often do we follow orders without questioning them? Whether it's from a boss, leader, or even societal norms, we frequently comply, assuming that those in power know best. But what if those instructions go against our ethics? What if we were asked to compromise our morals for the so-called greater good? Would we resist, or would we obey, just like the participants in Milgram's study? Another critical factor that enables good people to do bad things is dehumanization, the act of stripping others of their humanity. When we start seeing people as the enemy, subhuman, or lesser, it becomes far easier to justify cruelty against them. History is filled with examples of this: war propaganda, racial discrimination, political rhetoric, and even everyday social conflicts. But this isn't just history. It's happening right now. Consider the language used in debates, politics, and social media. How often are entire groups of people reduced to labels or stereotypes? How does this affect our ability to empathize? How does it create an us versus them mentality that fuels division and conflict? Dehumanization is just one piece of the puzzle. Another powerful force is social roles and group dynamics. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment is a chilling example. In just a few days, ordinary college students, randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners, completely lost themselves in their roles. The guards became abusive, while the prisoners became submissive and distressed, despite knowing it was all just an experiment. This raises an unsettling question. How much of our identity is truly our own? Are we free individuals, or are we subconsciously playing roles assigned to us by society? Understanding these forces is crucial because they don't just affect history, they affect you, me, and everyone around us. And if we fail to recognize them, we risk falling into the same patterns that have led to some of the darkest chapters in human history. So what's the solution? How can we resist these forces and ensure we never lose sight of our morality? Stay with me, because the final insight in this journey will be the most empowering and eye-opening revelation of all. The forces of authority, dehumanization, and group dynamics aren't just abstract psychological concepts. They shape our everyday decisions in ways we often fail to notice. They influence how we act at work, in schools, on social media, and even within our families. Recognizing these forces is the first step in resisting them. But the real danger lies in something much more subtle, the tipping point, that exact moment when a good person crosses the line. The journey into darkness rarely begins with a dramatic act of evil. Instead, it starts with small compromises, staying silent when witnessing injustice, following orders without question, or making a morally questionable choice just this once. Over time, these seemingly insignificant decisions accumulate, leading to a slippery slope that can result in profound moral failure. Pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever made a choice that went against your values simply because it felt easier or safer? What were the consequences? The reality is, we all face these moments. The key is learning to recognize them before they spiral out of control. But that raises an even deeper question. Are some people immune to the Lucifer effect? Or is this a danger we all face? Many of us like to believe that only certain types of people are capable of cruelty, that we, personally, would never fall into the same traps. But the unsettling truth is that no one is completely immune. Psychologists have long debated whether personality traits can protect someone from moral collapse. While qualities like strong empathy, self-awareness, and moral courage can serve as protective factors, history has repeatedly shown that under the right, or rather, the wrong circumstances, even the most decent individuals can succumb to these forces. Think of it this way. We all carry within us the potential for both incredible kindness and unimaginable cruelty. This duality is a recurring theme in literature, religion, and philosophy. The renowned Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung referred to this as the shadow, the darker, often suppressed aspects of ourselves that we prefer to ignore. Have you ever felt a surge of anger, envy, or resentment so intense that it startled you? Have you ever acted impulsively in the heat of the moment, only to deeply regret it later? These are glimpses of the shadow at work. Left unchecked, this hidden side of us can grow, leading to actions that align with the Lucifer effect. But here's the hopeful part. Awareness is our greatest defense. The more we understand the psychological mechanisms that lead to moral disengagement, the more power we have to resist them. One of the most insidious psychological forces at play is moral disengagement, a concept introduced by psychologist Albert Bandura. This explains how people rationalize harmful behavior to avoid guilt or remorse. For example, someone might tell themselves, "Everyone else is doing it. The ends justify the means. I'm just following orders." These rationalizations create psychological distance between people and their actions, making wrongdoing easier to justify. Now consider how this plays out in everyday life. A student cheats on an exam, thinking, "It's just this once." A manager mistreats employees, believing, "I have to be tough to meet company goals." A bystander watches injustice unfold but says nothing, assuming, "It's not my problem." Every time we justify small moral compromises, we risk normalizing behaviors we once considered unthinkable. So how do we fight back against moral disengagement? The answer lies in two powerful forces: moral vigilance, the ability to actively question our own actions and their consequences, even when it's uncomfortable. Ask yourself, am I justifying something that deep down I know is wrong? Would I still make this choice if no one was watching? Empathy, a shield against dehumanization. When we truly see others as complex, feeling individuals, with their own hopes, fears, and dreams, it becomes far more difficult to harm them. This is why storytelling, art, and human connection are so vital. They remind us of our shared humanity and break down the barriers that divide us. The more we foster genuine empathy, the harder it becomes for these psychological forces to take hold. But what about the bigger picture? How do we address the systems that allow the Lucifer effect to take hold on a larger scale? History has shown us that leaders play a pivotal role in shaping moral behavior, for better or worse. Adolf Hitler manipulated fear and prejudice to justify horrific atrocities. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. used their influence to inspire resistance against injustice and promote positive change. This brings us to a crucial question. What kind of leaders do we choose to follow? And just as importantly, what kind of influence do we have on those around us? Even if we don't hold a traditional position of power, we all have influence within our families, workplaces, and communities. The question is, do we use that influence to promote compassion and fairness? Or do we contribute, knowingly or unknowingly, to harm and division? Take a moment to reflect. Who are the people you admire? What values do they represent? And just as importantly, what kind of example are you setting for those who look up to you? At this point, one thing becomes clear. The battle between good and evil isn't just something that happens externally, in history books, governments, or institutions. It's an internal struggle, one that each of us faces daily. But here's the empowering truth. The same psychological forces that can lead people astray can also be harnessed for good. The power of authority can be used to inspire justice instead of cruelty. Group dynamics can create movements of compassion instead of division. Moral vigilance and empathy can turn bystanders into heroes. The same forces that create monsters can also create heroes. So how do we ensure we stay on the path of good? How do we cultivate the strength to resist the Lucifer effect when it arises? The answers lie ahead. Stay with me, because what comes next will reveal how to build a psychological armor that protects you from these invisible forces. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Understanding the forces that lead people astray is only the first step. The real challenge lies in resisting them when they arise in our daily lives. Throughout history, psychologists, spiritual leaders, and individuals facing extraordinary moral dilemmas have uncovered practical strategies to safeguard against moral failure. These strategies are not just theoretical. They have been tested in real-world situations where people had to choose between complicity and courage. And remember, the final insight in this section is the most transformative of all. It has the power to change not just how you see others, but how you see yourself. Recognizing the psychological forces behind the Lucifer effect is crucial, but awareness alone won't protect us. Understanding the dangers of a fire doesn't stop it from burning. You need fireproofing. In the same way, we need specific, actionable strategies to counteract the influence of authority, dehumanization, and moral disengagement. One of the most powerful defenses against moral failure is moral courage, the ability to stand up for what is right, even in the face of fear, opposition, or personal loss. Moral courage is what drives people to speak out against injustice, even when it's unpopular. Protect the vulnerable, even at great personal risk. Admit mistakes, even when it would be easier to stay silent. But here's the truth. No one is born with moral courage. It is cultivated. Think of Rosa Parks, whose refusal to give up her seat on a segregated bus helped ignite the civil rights movement. Or whistleblowers who expose corruption, knowing they might lose their jobs, reputations, or even their freedom. These individuals weren't fearless. They simply chose to act despite their fear. So how can you develop moral courage in your own life? Ask yourself, what principles matter most to me? Honesty, fairness, compassion, accountability. Reflect on past moments when you faced a moral dilemma. Did you stay true to your values, or did you compromise them for convenience or approval? A practical exercise. Imagine yourself in challenging ethical situations. What would you do if you witnessed bullying at work? How would you respond if pressured to follow an unethical directive? By visualizing these scenarios and rehearsing your response, you strengthen your ability to act decisively when faced with real dilemmas. Surround yourself with people who share your values. Strong social connections provide accountability and encouragement, making it easier to resist the pressures of conformity and blind obedience. What happens when we find ourselves in systems or environments designed to erode our morals? This is where situational awareness becomes critical. Situational awareness means recognizing the subtle cues and group dynamics that shape behavior. What is considered normal in a given environment? Are unethical actions excused because everyone else is doing it? If you notice patterns of exclusion, manipulation, or harm, ask yourself, is this truly right, or have I simply accepted it because it's the norm? Often, we feel powerless in the face of systemic issues, but history proves that small acts of resistance create ripple effects. Speaking up against unethical workplace practices may seem risky, but it can encourage others to do the same. Choosing kindness in daily interactions can counteract dehumanization. Leading by example fosters a culture of integrity, inspiring others to follow suit. Every action, no matter how small, shapes the world around us. The question is, will you be a passive bystander or an active force for good? The philosopher Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Self-reflection allows us to recognize our biases, own our mistakes, grow from them. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about becoming just a little better each day. Make it a habit to regularly ask yourself, what motivated my actions today? Did I treat others with respect and empathy? Were there moments when I stayed silent when I should have spoken up? Training yourself to reflect on these questions builds integrity and moral clarity over time. This brings us to the ultimate question. Can we completely eliminate the Lucifer effect? The answer may depend on individual and societal factors, but the key lies in developing what psychologist Philip Zimbardo calls the heroic imagination. The belief that ordinary people can perform extraordinary acts of courage in the face of moral challenges. Heroism is not reserved for the exceptional few. It's within reach for all of us. How to cultivate the heroic imagination. Look for opportunities to practice small acts of heroism. Stand up for someone being treated unfairly. Volunteer to help those in need. Choose kindness over indifference in everyday interactions. Study the lives of heroes. Whether historical figures or modern-day change-makers, their stories remind us that courage is a choice anyone can make. At this point, you may be wondering, what is the most transformative realization of all? It is this. The line between good and evil does not run between groups or nations. It runs through every human heart. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, "The battle line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man." This realization is both humbling and empowering. It reminds us that we are all capable of both harm and healing. But more importantly, it gives us the agency to choose. In every moment, we decide whether to act with integrity or succumb to pressure, foster compassion or contribute to division, resist darkness or let it take root. As we come to the end of this journey, let me leave you with a challenge. Reflect on what you've learned today. How can you apply it in your own life? How will you resist the forces that pull you away from your values? How will you become a force for good in a world that desperately needs it? The answers to these questions aren't easy, but they are worth pursuing. Because the battle between good and evil is not fought on distant battlefields or in abstract theories. It is fought within each of us every single day. So the next time you face a moral choice, remember this. You have the power to choose. You have the power to resist. And you have the power to be a force for good. The question is, will you rise to the challenge?